Jason, a young man from an ordinary, low-income family, had always dreamed of living his life the way he would like to and not being dependent on anyone. After getting an education in the capital, he decided to return to his hometown, hoping that with his capital studies, he would be in demand in his hometown and achieve success faster. One evening after his return, Jason decided to take a walk through his hometown and remember his childhood. At the entryway, he bumped into an unfamiliar young woman who greeted him with a smile. "I am sorry, have we met?" asked Jason. "Well, of course. I'm Doris from apartment 17, laughed the young woman. Jason was very surprised and even thought at first that she was playing a joke on him, but after looking at her more closely, he remembered her. When he had left the town, Doris was still a teenager, but over the past 5 years, she has grown into a charming young woman. Jason was pleasantly surprised and suggested that they take a walk along the promenade. So, Doris and Jason began dating. 6 months later, they got married and started living in Jason's apartment. Doris was working at a local factory as a seamstress. Jason could not find a job in his field in town, but he finally succeeded in getting a position as a driver for a director of one of the town's companies. As time passed, Doris gave birth to a beautiful daughter, but sadness came into the family instead of joy. Jason began coming home late, explaining that the baby kept him up at night and he had to sleep it off in the garage. Doris tried to talk to her husband, but it always ended in a row. Doris suspected her husband of cheating, but still stubbornly refused to believe the obvious. Even finding another woman's lipstick under the seat of his car one day, Doris believed Jason, who said that the boss's wife had dropped it when he had been driving her. After a while, Jason told his wife one day that he had to go away for 2 weeks on a business trip with his boss. "But are business trips part of your duties?" wondered Doris. She was very upset. Their daughter had just fallen ill, and Doris was afraid to be left alone in such a situation. But Jason reassured her, promising that his parents would help her, and left. Doris had to put up with the situation. Fortunately, it all ended well. The daughter recovered quickly, and a week after her husband left, they went with her to the park to ride on the merry-go-round. There, Doris bumped into her acquaintance Eva, who worked as a secretary at the same company where Jason was a driver. "Hi, Doris. Why are you walking alone without Jason?" asked Eva, smiling at Doris and her daughter. "Oh, Jason is on a business trip," smiled Doris back. "He left with his boss a week ago." "I'll probably upset you, but we don't have business trips in our company," said Eva, embarrassed. "And Jason's boss is on vacation at sea with his wife right now." The smile slipped from Doris's lips, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She grabbed her daughter and rushed home. There, she gathered her things and then drove to her own apartment she had inherited from her granny. Her cousin Linda, who had come to the town to study, was living there temporarily, but currently she was away, and Doris hoped to get over her grief in peace, without too many questions or explanations. Another week passed, and one morning Doris awoke to the sound of the front door opening. She went out into the corridor to meet her cousin and explain her unexpected visit, but when she saw who had come in, she froze in place. Laughing merrily, Linda entered the apartment in an embrace with Jason. The intense pause occurred. Jason was the first to come to his senses, and he asked what Doris was doing here. "Have you forgotten that this is my apartment?" exclaimed Doris indignantly. "But how did the two of you end up here? It doesn't look like you just happened to meet at the door." "You've got it right," said Jason tiredly and grudgingly, "but I'm not going to make excuses for you. Get ready quickly and let's go home. If you're not home in 10 minutes, blame yourself. You won't get there again." Having said this, her husband left the apartment and Doris continued to stand in shock at what had happened. As she looked up at her cousin, she noticed her strangely superior gaze. This forced the woman to pull herself together, and she said, rapping out every word slowly, "Get out of my house." The smugness and superiority on Linda's face changed to bewilderment. "Why? It was your husband who had persuaded me to do it. I'm not going anywhere because I have nowhere to go. We're kindred people." "Get out!" shouted Doris, unable to restrain herself, and quickly throwing her cousin's things into her suitcase, defiantly put it at the door. Linda snorted and, promising to complain to her parents, left the apartment. An hour later, Jason called. "So you decided not to come home? Well, that's your choice, but I'll see how you will live now. You are nothing without me, and not able to live without," he shouted angrily and hung up. Doris immediately filed for divorce, and a little later, her former classmate Brooke called her and asked her to sew a dress for her pregnant sister. Brooke knew that Doris was good at sewing, and there was nothing suitable in the stores. Doris agreed with pleasure. Brooke and her sister were pleased with the order and recommended Doris to their other acquaintances. So Doris started sewing at home. Soon there were so many orders that the woman could no longer cope alone. She rented a small place, hired assistants, and things started to go quicker. A few years later, Doris and her young daughter moved into a small, comfortable house in the country. Jason had been living with Linda all this time, and the sounds of rowing from their apartment could often be heard by their neighbours. A few more years passed, and now Doris's daughter had grown up and was getting ready for her graduation party. Doris had made her a gorgeous dress, and they went to the shoe store together to pick out the most beautiful shoes for her. They parked their SUV in the parking lot and headed toward the mall. Suddenly someone called out to Doris. She turned around and saw an unkempt man in a crumpled shirt getting out of a similarly shabby car. "Doris, is that you?" he asked, and turned his eyes to the girl who looked so much like her mother. "And that's my daughter?" "You're wrong. That's my daughter," said Doris sharply, and walked past him. The perplexed daughter ran after her mother. "Mum, is that really my father?" "But you didn't describe him like that. I thought he was different." "Honey, not everyone who is proud of themselves ends up succeeding in life. I'm also surprised that he could go down like that, but that's his choice, and we have our own life," smiled Doris. She looked at her daughter warmly and confessed that she had met the man she loved and that she would like to introduce him to her. The girl was happy for her mother and hugged her tightly in approval. They continued walking, chatting happily over various things, and Jason, seeing them off, sighed heavily and thought sadly about his life. Linda and their 3 children were waiting for him in his apartment, which had long needed renovation, and also a modest dinner was waiting for him, which was all the driver of an almost bankrupt company could earn.